Hey, today I'm talking about 3 kids horror movies from the aughts that all have the same sort of aesthetic. And the names of those 3 films are Coraline, Corpse Bride, and Monster House. This tub is Coraline. This is a 2009 film starring Dakota Fanning. It is stop motion and based off of a Neil Gaiman book of the same name. And the basic premise is Coraline's family moves to a strange new town, and she's not adjusting to this new life well. But she finds this mysterious door that maybe leads to a parallel world where everything's better, or maybe she's just imagining it. And yeah, no, this movie is great. I really enjoyed myself. I had a feeling that that was gonna happen because I've only heard good things about it, and one of my brothers really enjoys this movie. And yeah, it just worked really well for me too. Really top to bottom, this movie was great. The aesthetic worked really, really well. I'm not huge into like super creepy, weird things in kids' movies, but I think the way they did it in this film really served the story well. It's most of the people, and most of the time everyone looks more normal, realistic, but then you get into these more like she's kind of scared scenarios, and that's when features are more exaggerated. So narratively it makes sense. I also really loved that they left it ambiguous whether or not all of this stuff actually happened or it was happening in her head. I prefer those types of stories, so it leaves the audience to decide for themselves what happened. Like, based off of your experience with this film, you decide what happens in the end, what is truth. It moved at a really good pace too. Like, it never stayed on anything too long, but they did such a good job with the world development and the characters that I honestly could have stayed in the different sections longer, like meeting her neighbors or like more shenanigans in the near universe, which probably means I should check out the book. And Coraline's such a great lead. Dakota Fanning did a great job of carrying this film. And Coraline's character is just so interesting, but also very realistic. I also really loved Keith David as the cat. He crushed that. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie and would totally recommend it. If you've somehow never seen this classic like I had, totally check it out. And if you haven't seen it before, it's worth revisiting. It's such a good movie. The next up is Corpse Bride. This is a 2005 Tim Burton film starring his favorite actors, Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter. I may have seen this movie before, or I could just know a lot about it. I'm not really sure. Either way, it's pretty good. The basic premise is there's this arranged wedding that's gonna happen, but the boy is really struggling with his vows, so he goes into the woods to practice them and ends up accidentally marrying a dead person. So okay, the premise is very silly. It's such a sitcom premise. But the movie, for what it is, was decent. It's a shorter movie, but honestly it could have been a little shorter. I definitely liked the design of the corpse bride herself. I think they really nailed that, and Helena Bonham Carter crushed that role. Johnny did a good job of playing against type. I also really loved the human love interest. I thought she did a good job. I really wish the plot wasn't so silly, especially if you think about it in this context of like these 2 young people just met each other the day before they're supposed to get married, and then he runs off with another woman, and then that same day she meets this other guy for the first time, and she's like, no, I don't want to marry the villain of the story, I want to marry the hero of the story. She's right, she should marry the hero of the story, not the villain of the story, but there's no way for her to know the roles of either of these men. Like, to her, they're both just brand new men that she's meeting for the first time today. So like, from her perspective, they're the same. I would say for a good chunk of this movie, it was kind of comfortably sitting in the liked category, but it had a really solid, satisfying ending. Like, I loved where all of the stories ended up, so that bumped it up into the quite liked category. So it's basically a 4 out of 5. So, would I recommend this movie? Yeah, it's pretty good. You've probably already seen it by now, but if you haven't, it's definitely not a bad time and worth checking out. It's also pretty short, so like, yeah. And lastly is Monster House. This is a 2006 3D animated movie produced by Steven Spielberg. And the basic premise is this like 10-year-old kid really doesn't like his obnoxious neighbor. So the day before Halloween, he gives him a heart attack and then breaks into his home and then destroys it. I mean, that's honestly it. To give more context, as in spoiling this movie, and I don't care because this movie wasn't good. I didn't put this in the didn't liked, but it's definitely not liked. The reason that the grumpy old man neighbor is an asshole is because he saved this woman from a life of being a freak in a circus, and while building her dream house, she accidentally dies, and then he finishes the house, and her spirit possesses the house and now attacks anyone who comes by. So really, the movie ends with this neighbor boy killing the spirit of this man's dead wife, all because they're assholes. And like, you could look at it like the kid is setting her free, that's probably what they're going for. But this house was her dream, to have her own big place that she can call home. It's what she always wanted. And then the hero of the story literally destroys her dream. And that's a good thing. I mean, ignoring the plot stuff, I also just wasn't super duper into this. The characters or the design, everyone's a bit too crass and a bit gross and just like, it really just did not work for me on most levels. It did keep my attention though, so I will give it that. And I do think the performances were fine. Steve Buscemi plays the old man and he definitely gives some emotion there. So yeah, it's a very meh movie, which is the category that it rightfully lives in. So would I recommend it? If you're like desperate for some kids' spooky fun times, maybe, but like you gotta be real desperate. Otherwise, yeah, no, I don't recommend it. It's not great. Alrighty, now for today's rankings. First up, we got Coraline sitting at number 37 in the really like section. And then after that is Corpse Bride sitting at number 130 in the quite like section. Both categories are very big. And then bringing up the rear, rightfully so, is Monster House sitting at number 200 in the meh category. And this is a total of 228 old movies so far this year.